So welcome everyone to session 9, I believe, on living the truth. And the title of this session is Beyond Dualities. So I really want to look at well, I guess I'll introduce a little bit about what non-duality is, although we have covered this in the past. But I really want to look at how we live the truth of non-duality. And I want to look, how do you live in harmony with the truth of non-duality? So really taking it way beyond the non-duality as a philosophy. You can find lots of that online. If you put in, I noticed if I put in non-duality in YouTube, I got lots of very philosophical discussions and debates about non-duality. Well, that can be fun for the mind to play around with. It doesn't do us much good in terms of how it affects our lives, how we live our lives. Okay, before I jump in too much, I'm going to give a really brief introduction to non-duality, and if it's something that people need more of, then I could possibly do more sessions on sort of what it is. It's a translation of the word Advaita, which directly translates into English as not two. Not two. So it basically means not two. It's one undivided, without a second. So it's different. Saying not two is different than saying oneness. It has a different sense to it, right? And of course, this points to the difficulty of using language at all in discussing this, which people have pointed out in our dialogues in the past, how language simply fails us. But we do our best to communicate using language. So what we're really trying to say is non-duality. When we say non-duality, is point to life as it is right now, before the appearances of labels and concepts, actually before language, in other words, before thought, before concepts. So it's pointing to life, this non-dual nature of life, right now, in the moment to moment, before we conceptualize it and think about it, give it signs. It's the meaning of what we're talking about when we say signlessness. So it's not simply a philosophy about the nature of reality. It actually refers to direct experience. And that's what I was pointing to in the guided meditation was, we can look at our direct experience, how it's unfolding moment to moment. And this is really the crux of what we do in this practice, in this insight meditation group. As we look at our direct experience, we see we could see how it all interconnects, how the state of the mind affects the quality of the breath, which affects the quality of the body in general. We could see how what's arising is just naturally unfolding as well. It's not something that we're, at the controls of. It's not like a computer game where you have a joystick and some buttons and you're running the show. It's very much just a natural unfolding. I remember Krishnamurti is somebody who I used to listen to speak, watch videos. Krishnamurti's a Advaita Vedanta, I guess you could say, teacher. It's a long story about who he is. We could actually perhaps do a session on Krishnamurti as well at some point. was asked a complex question about non-duality and simply looked at the person and said, I want it to rain. and they just chuckled. And that was his answer. He didn't say anything else. I want it to rain. And he was really just pointing to that, yeah, we can want and wish for all kinds of things, but we don't control the weather patterns. It's also actually non-duality, interestingly, is it also underlies all the spiritual traditions, from what I've seen. It's when you get down into the bones or the depths of the different spiritual traditions, it's really teaching, ultimately teaching non-duality. And it's also the ever-present reality that underlies each of our experiences. It's the underlying reality. And this reality, as we've said so many times, is obscured or veiled. And this is what the Buddha referred to as ignorance. When the truth of this reality is obscured, we live in ignorance of it, not knowing it, really a misunderstanding. It's kind of an innocent, I call it, ignorance sounds like such a strong word. I like to think of it as an innocent misunderstanding about the nature of reality. We just kind of misperceive. It's an innocent misperception that just is. And it's obscured very simply. Non-duality is obscured or veiled very simply, I think, because the mind only thinks in dualistic terms. So it's beyond the mind to grasp it. Have you noticed that the mind just thinks in these dualistic ways? This or that. Everything's in. You have one, you have the other. These sense of conceptual dualisms. The mind can only think in this way. So hence we have this innocent misunderstanding, with this veiling of the reality of non-duality. In the dualistic thinking, it's not bad, right? It keeps us alive. Dualistic thinking keeps us alive, but it also causes us suffering. We suffer because we misperceive, misunderstand the nature of reality. It's really that simple. We suffer because of this innocent misunderstanding. And when we go beyond the self, when we go beyond the egoic mind, we go beyond this self, beyond awareness, non-duality, the truth of non-duality reveals itself. That's simply the process. Nisargadatta, a quote, when you go beyond awareness, there is a state of non-duality in which there is no cognition, only pure being. In the state of non-duality, all separation ceases. So I read that again. That's it's a sentence with more meaning than I think any sentence I've ever seen. When you go beyond awareness, there is a state of non-duality in which there is no cognition, only pure being. In the state of non-duality, all separation ceases. That's Nisargadatta. It's really pointing to so many aspects, going beyond the self, even the self that that identifies with awareness. When you go beyond that, non-duality is what's left. And in that place, there's no need, no conceptualizing and cognizing about it. You're simply touching pure being. Of course, it doesn't mean you never use your mind again, but you're using it from this place of pure being. And in this place of pure being, all separation ceases. And this is the sense of not two or oneness. So, of course, the mind can't understand this, right? Because it thinks in dualistic terms. So, a provisional teaching that I've offered in the past is the two truths. People remember the two truths. It can be helpful for the conceptual mind or the egoic mind to kind of let go of the kind of arguments it might have with these kinds of ideas. Of course, if you've awakened to non-duality or the truth of non-duality to a degree, then the two truths teaching isn't helpful. But the two truths really says that there's conventional or relative reality and there's ultimate or absolute reality. So the conventional or relative truth is, this is how things appear to the senses. We see, we feel, we hear. This is all the appearances. Things are phenomena that appear. They appear solid, such as a chair, a cup. It appears solid. A person. And in this teaching, we don't deny the appearance of this reality. You might hear some non-dual teachers actually just kind of discount the realm of appearances, but this is a reality. The appearance of this reality seems very real to us, right? I mean, you see a cup and you touch it, and that appearance has a relative truth. So we need to respect this relative reality. So the absolute truth, it's the way things are in their essential nature. So what creates suffering is believing the relative is permanent and solidly, inherently existing. So we're clinging to the relative truth as if it was the absolute truth. So non-duality really deals with this ultimate truth, this absolute truth, the truth that's beyond all appearances, concepts, and labels. So this is a kind of a helpful way to kind of conceptualize the teachings. Just think, there's this world of appearances, and then there's the underlying essential nature, and there's kind of these two truths. And confusion, there's confusion when we mix the two, right? For example, some might hear a teaching about the ultimate truth, the ultimate nature of this cup, right? The ultimate nature of this cup. And if this cup is empty of inherent existence, then why doesn't the fluid just, fall out onto my lap? There's liquid in it. Or if a chair is empty of any inherent reality, why don't I just fall through and sit on the floor? So this is trying to, in other words, place a relative body in an ultimate chair. So there can be a lot of confusion when we try to mix the relative and the the ultimate. So I'll leave you that just as kind of a way to relax the mind a little bit around some of these notions. Say, oh, that's the mind can go, oh, that's the relative truth, and here's the ultimate truth. So given all that, that preamble, I guess, is what does living non-duality look like? What is the nature of living without division or without separation, with oneness or not two? So you'll hear, I guess, another way that you might hear people mixing the relative and the ultimate. You might hear someone say that any teaching or statement is dualistic. So why teach? Or actually, why say anything? You know, I've heard non-dual teachers, you know, it was kind of the in thing to say there for a while, that any teaching is dualistic, so I'm just not going to teach. I had a spiritual friend years ago that would reply to almost everything that I said with, well, that's not really true. So he was, you know, we're having a conversation in our relative experience, right? Two human beings just communicating in the relative, in the world of appearances. And he was inserting the non-dual truth that that's not really true. Made it very difficult to be around. I think I was, for a while there, I was his only friend. That would kind of, yes, you're right, that's not absolutely true. Well, let's just talk about it anyway, right? Just for fun, and try to get him off this this mixing of the two. So even the statement that any teaching is dualistic is a dualistic statement, right? It's so you never get away from it, and it is true. It's a true statement, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that any teaching is dualistic. It's helpful to point that out sometimes, and it's helpful for teachers to realize that sometimes, that we don't think that we're teaching truths as Dharma teachers. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Just more on this whole dualism and non-dualism. Dualism doesn't mean bad either. Something that you may hear people pointing at. Dualism is simply a way of experiencing life. In the relative world, we experience life through the mind and as dualisms. It's the way you could say that phenomenon appear to the mind. They appear to the mind in a dualistic way. It's not bad, it's just the way appearances are. It's nothing bad. Appearances are just as much part of ultimate truth as everything else. It's not, dualisms or not, it does not mean bad. And in a way, a lot of duality gets presented as non-duality. So saying something is dualistic is often used to discount something. Oh, that's just, that's dualistic, implying that it's not useful or it's false. So I just wanted to, just put that out in terms of a way of living non-duality, is we're not rejecting duality. We're not rejecting the appearances as if it has no value or as if it has no reality. Dreams feel very real. So duality has a place in all of our lives, all the time. We live in this world of appearances, in this relative, conventional world of appearances. Everyone does. Everyone. Even if you've recognized non-dual reality, the truth of non-dual reality to the deepest level, you still manifest in the world of appearances. You still are expressed in the dualistic world of appearances. So the truth is, everyone is already always innately awake, which I've said before. We're already Buddhas. Yet this is not helpful unless we know this experientially, unless we know this directly. It's not helpful just to hear it. And this doesn't make sense to the mind, right? Non-duality doesn't make sense to anyone's mind. So we got to stop trying to figure it out. That's why it's just this meditation, or you don't even have to do it in a meditation. Simply seeing it over and over again in our experience as we go through the world is the process, the strategy. You can be an expression of truth, and at the same time, be ignorant of that truth, be confused about that truth, which is how most human beings live their lives. So non-dual truth isn't a rejection of duality. It's a truth that includes it and goes beyond it. So the world of appearances is included in non-dual truth, and it also goes beyond it. It's duality is encompassed within this larger, deeper non-dual truth. So duality doesn't get eliminated. You still live in the world of appearances. And this is very, very important, because we somehow think that truth is going to be realized and then we're going to transcend it in some way and never experience, sorrow or difficulty, or we're going to be above life somehow. It's not that at all. It's simply seeing the nature of the fabric of the reality that you're living in. There's no dismissal of the dualistic aspects of life. Another thing you might hear, and I've had teachers that have said, there's nothing you can do to speed up or slow down your awakening, which is like saying there's no spiritual practices you can do that can help you awaken. And this can be true. Someone may practice for decades and never awaken. At the same time, most people that do awaken have been doing spiritual practices. So that's another interesting way it's very few people that they're just, sitting on their couch eating a hot dog and poof, they're awake, right? Most people are they're on some kind of process or path, spiritual path. So that's something I've always, if spiritual practices don't help, why is it that most people that have woken up, awakened, have spiritual practice? And I think people that do have a spiritual practice, the realization is more abiding, and that it can be integrated. So having a practice and in a community in which you practice with, it's very helpful in harmonizing what's been seen within how you live life. Very important that the notion of community in this aspect of the practice. So I think what we do in terms of practice has at least an indirect effect, an indirect relationship with awakening. I wouldn't say that it has no relationship, because everything is related to everything else. Everything you do is related to everything else and impacts everything. You know, the world is really, you hear me and many other teachers saying, causes and conditions, right? Bye to my wife says, if I ever hear you that phrase causes and conditions again, I'm, it's not going to go insane. Like you say it way too much. Isn't there another word? Well, it's causal factors. That's what it's the only, but a lot of it's indirect, right? We don't know. There's all these relationships and causal factors that a lot of them are indirect. So I like to offer the teachings again, as I said, I'm not teaching the truth. I'm offering strategies that can evoke awakening. They're really strategies. Rupert Spira, a teacher I have great respect for, talks about the processes of recognition, processes of recognizing the truth. I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh speak in similar ways of methods and processes that we engage with to realize interbeing. So there's a real distinction, I think, between strategies, teachings as strategies that are meant to evoke awakening, and teachings that attempt to be statements of the absolute truth. Very different, right? You can see kind of the difference there. And this is a trap for many teachers. We can start to think that what we're teaching is the absolute truth, and it's not. I think I've said things and then finished my long answer to a question with the statement, well, of course, nothing I say is absolutely true. And then I just watched that person's face drop. I've been taking notes and remembering. Now you're telling me what you say is not true. That is true, and it's not. At best, what I teach is a useful strategy. At best, simply methods and strategies to help in this recognition process. And they're specific to people's situations as well. For example, I may have a person I tell you don't need to do anything to awaken. You're already awake. You simply need to recognize that truth, right? I could say that to somebody, and this might be appropriate for that person, especially if it's a person that's kind of over-efforting. And what they don't need is more, technique, right? There's another, and they're usually the ones asking for technique, like, how do I do that? Or how do I do that? And that person say, you're already awake. You simply need to recognize that. Just rest in that truth. Rest in your being, in the stillness of your being. Let's just do that. You're already awake. You don't need to do anything else. That would be a very appropriate teaching strategy. But for someone else that, maybe, I may tell them to meditate every day. That person may be, it's kind of lazy, maybe, or maybe not lazy, or just, not practicing, and, or they may have they may have heard the non-dual teachings and thought, well, if nothing matters, then why bother doing anything? I'm already one with everything. Why do anything? So they may need to have some encouragement to move them along in the process of recognizing the truth. So you can see how teachings are, very specific to where people are at, and it's sometimes hard for you to see for yourself what's needed. I find, especially for the person that's over-efforting, they just think, if I get one more technique, that'll get me over the hump, right? One more practice, one more technique. If I can just figure out one more thing, if I just figure this out, then I'll stop thinking about, I'll stop using the mind to conceptualize. If I just figure out this one more thing, of course, and that's a trap. So when you hear teaching, just ask, is this helpful to me? That could be about, so it's a pragmatic question rather than a philosophical question. And this can be helpful, especially, in this world that we live in with so much access to information. You can really get sort of overwhelmed with all the different teachings and all the different strategies, and strategies, quite honestly, that might lead you in directions that aren't helpful at all. So it can be useful just to say, is this helpful to me where I'm at right now? So just to sum up, non-dual understanding, or the recognition of non-dual reality, does not deny or resist the mind's dualistic view of life. It actually embraces it. It includes it. Although the mind cannot directly know non-duality, this understanding can be recognized. It can be recognized. The wholeness that you're looking for is what you are, and this can be recognized. The mind can recognize it. Not by playing with concepts, by, again, direct experience, seeing what's unfolding in your direct experience. And this goes against, often what we're conditioned to believe, that we can figure things out, and so it can be difficult for the mind to accept this. But it is seeing for yourself in your own experience. And of course, the seeker, which we've spoken about here several times, this offers really nothing to the seeker. It's the experience of being a seeker in the first place. That's the illusion. And that's the illusion that the non-dual teachings expose. I know I used the ocean and waves metaphor in the past. I know a few of you resonated with that in terms of deathlessness. But we are like it's a helpful metaphor that can take us so far. We are like waves in the ocean, experiencing ourselves as separate from the ocean. And we're looking at the same time looking for the ocean. Right? We're like waves in the ocean, and we experience ourselves as quite separate from the ocean. Of course, we're not. as waves being separate. And we're looking, we spend time looking for the ocean. And eventually you see that the wave was always the ocean. And even if the wave fails to find the ocean, it is still the ocean. You can't be otherwise. You're still the ocean. So I'll end it there, and went over a little bit there on the talk, but leave some time for any questions or comments, whatever's on your mind or not on your mind in your experience.
I'm waiting for the day where I can say that's an awful talk, Stephen. Like, thank you so much. I sound like I said this before. I sound like a broken record, but it's totally truthful. So I just to start the discussion, I think, yeah, the whole thing of someone saying, oh, you can't really say any teaching because everything is dualistic, so can't teach anything. Yeah, it's I've really come to see through this series that, like, the dualistic is the non-dualistic. Like, they're a part of each other, or the dualistics are part of the non-dualistic, and the non-dualistic is part of the dualistic. So I guess technically that's true, but I think, as soon as you say something is not useful, by default, it's actually useful already. Like, it's just, it's just, so yeah, I think, I don't know. I guess it's nice to have that pointed out once in a while, that, like, don't take these things too seriously, because, like, ultimately when we talk, it's not really it's all an abstraction. It's not actually the real thing. But I think for the most part, yeah, I could see how like we do need to be able to talk to each other. And it is helpful. I found it helpful, the talks. So the other thing too, I was thinking about your point about kind of like, people saying that they don't really need a spiritual practice because ultimately it just comes down to, you just have to have the direct experience, and that's what that's what the quote unquote end goal of of whatever enlightenment or meditation practice or whatever is. You kind of like you kind of cut away all the add-ons to your experience, and you're just experiencing. But I don't think you can actually cut away all the add-ons unless you have a spiritual experience. Like, if you had to ask me before I started kind of like doing meditation and stuff, that I feel like I was directly experiencing life, I would have for sure said I did, but I feel like through the meditation practice, a lot of those add-ons have been like, there's a lot of, like, they're there. There's still add-ons there, but like, I'm much more aware of them, and for the most part, there's a lot less of them in my daily life, I feel. So yeah, I don't think, if someone says that, I I don't really feel like they really, maybe they just don't know kind of like what, they haven't experienced it for themselves, what having a spiritual practice is like, perhaps, or they've been disillusioned somehow by their past experiences. And I was thinking on the other end of the spectrum, so you can have people that are, they think they're directly experiencing life without a spiritual practice, but then you can have people who, they have a spiritual practice, but they don't actually bring it into their lives. And so then you get into this more of the spiritual bypassing type thing, where you're not actually taking the spiritual practices and applying it to your own, like, inner traumas or emotions. And I was just thinking, it's kind of neat to think of that on a spectrum of, I feel like there's varying levels of delusion there. And I was also thinking, like, how would you tie in maybe you could tie in the concept of dark night of soul, like that kind of, like, people get into this abyss of, like, some people say, like, they've been meditating and then all of a sudden they just get into this, like, it's almost like this deep rooted nihilism, like, what's the point of anything? And they're like, they fall into the state of deep depression, and like, it can be hard to get out. And anyways, I have to think about that one more, but I'm wondering if maybe you might have some comments on how that concept of the dark night of the soul would come in there, because I feel like it's I feel like it might be related somehow, but maybe I'm thinking about it too much. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I'll have to say. It's yeah, and I really feel like more like this living, in our culture, the way of the world, living in our, like, living like freedom, like living a free life is like, like, I should be able to do whatever I want and stuff like that. And that's kind of viewed as being freedom in our natural state, right? Like, I'll just do whatever I want, and just kind of like, like, but it's like, after doing this practice for a while, it's like, no, it's like, I feel like I'm doing whatever I want, but it's like I feel way more positive, like in a positive states in general than I was, where I was kind of having that more of that other attitude. So it's interesting that freedom becomes a different thing. I feel like once you're when you're kind of, feel like maybe if you're trying to, like, go inwards and you sustain it, freedom becomes totally different. And I feel like it's much more of what freedom actually is than what maybe a lot of people think it is. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments on, Jason threw out a couple of, I know some of you have gone through the dark night of the soul. So if you have anything you want to share on that, because it's part of the process that unfolds as the self is transcended, that this thing is actually, it comes from a Christian mystic, the dark night of the soul. I think, is it Saint Francis that coined that phrase? Does anybody know offhand? I can't remember which Christian mystic.
I think it was Saint Francis, actually.
Yeah. So it comes from a Christian, but it's experienced. It's a universal experience, whereby, and I'm just curious what people have experienced they'd like to share with what happens as the personal will starts to fall away. The things that were important to you, that you thought were important to you, start to become either much less important or not actually important at all. This can be experienced as a dark night of the soul. very difficult period. I'll leave it. I know some of you have gone through it because you've shared with me, but maybe it's not something you want to share on a video. And the notion of freedom. Yeah, freedom, as it's is in terms of spiritual freedom, freedom from realizing non-dual truth, or realizing our true nature, actually takes away, if freedom is, being able to do whatever you want, it takes away the you and the wanting. So it really completely removes all those the whole notion of how we contextualize, we think of freedom, but it's a different freedom, right? It's a freedom to that comes from liberation, from knowing your true nature and being able to operate from that deeper nature of your being. Opens up so much potentiality that's actually unfathomable by the little me that wants to be able to do to do what it wants. Yeah, two very deep aspects of this practice that have been raised.
To get really philosophical even more, I've been working with the idea of causes and conditions and the idea of impermanence. And so if we're talking about freedom, and linking that to kind of causes and conditions, how free are we if everything around us has somehow turned me into Carl as I am, right? How free was I to be who I am? I think that's an interesting kind of thing, and in some ways I sometimes give up on worrying about it, and that to me is where I think it's a sense of liberation in some way. And then the other notion in Buddhism is impermanence, right? That nothing is ever going to remain the same, or I have no control over in some ways some of the things that happen to me, and that's impermanent too. I wonder if that's what you're sort of getting at there, Jason, if that's part of it. And for me, trying to settle into that, in a sense too, without, the whole idea of clinging to things, to me is sort of part of the issue of duality as well. I cling to my ego, which is strong. And when I try not to, there are times when it's pretty liberating too. It doesn't, but it's never permanent, right? Where I feel like I don't care what somebody thinks about me. It was just some thoughts.
Stephen, when you suggested that we ask ourselves, is this useful? What came to my mind was Ajahn Brahm's story about good, bad, who knows? How do I know what's useful? Because it may appear, but then tomorrow I change my mind. So is there a criteria that can even be helpful in saying this may be useful now for a week or may not be useful in a month? Is there, can I even answer that question? Is there a way of finding out?
Are you finished? Do you want me to?
Yeah.
That's
it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think what I'm pointing to there is, so if, if a teaching is offered, to rather than jumping into the mind and looking at it philosophically, looking at it very practically, is this something I can apply in my life, and will that be helpful? And, kind of using it's kind of a discernment or an intuition in a way. And so, so just kind of looking at teachings in that way. Is this something that will be helpful in me recognizing the truth? And just leaving it at that. And, you try it, and if it doesn't feel helpful, then of course, move on. It's just kind of a way of shifting out of the mind into something much more practical, away from a more philosophical way of discerning teachings, because it is a very practical thing. I mean, I've had students say, "Well, Stephen, your teachings are very practical and very forget what other words people use, but what else is there? Like, otherwise, I'm going to give philosophical discussions, and everybody might be very entertained. Their minds might be entertained, and the ego is reinforced. But that's not helpful in recognizing our true nature. So yeah, just that I didn't, and there's no strategy that really for discerning that. It's really just kind of your I guess your instincts, and in a very practical way. Is this helpful? And just kind of leaving it at that. And yeah, I wasn't trying to say more than that, really. On Carl's notion of, when he said, you don't, it's hard to, you feel free when you realize you don't have any control over anything that's happened that has produced Carl, or produced any of us, right? It's just nature unfolding. And really, what freedom is there in that? Right? We think we're in control, right? If we think that's freedom, that we make these, we control our destiny in that sense, or control our past, really. It's more about controlling our past. But really the freedom comes from recognizing when we recognize. So when we don't know the true nature, there is really our true nature, there really is no freedom. We're constantly just struggling with what's unfolding, right? And there's no freedom in that. The freedom comes when we recognize our true nature, that we know that things are unfolding, right? And we accept that, this is what's happened. This moment, this is what's unfolded. And by accepting it clearly and being present with it as it is, without struggling with it, that's where the freedom comes in. That's why it feels like liberation. All these potentials open up when I'm no longer struggling with what's unfolding in the present moment. Right? So this is really important. And, we've talked about this. It's why the acceptance is not passive resignation. When we say acceptance, it's not passive resignation. Acceptance actually empowers us in terms of so many responsibility, really, and the potential options that emerge for action out of that acceptance of the present moment. So that's the freedom. That's the freedom, and that's the dualism, the world of appearances, the relative world being so crucial, so important, because we act and manifest in this relative world, and we can do so in such a different way when we understand wholeness. And we understand how things unfold. I hope I'm making myself clear. I'm getting a little foggy, I think, with how I'm saying it, but it's an important notion of what freedom is. That word, we've heard it a lot lately in this country, and what does it actually mean in terms of this path? It's something quite different in terms of it opening options to what we can manifest in the world. And those options emerge from the recognition of truth, of the non-dual truth. They can only emerge from the recognition of non-dual truth. Otherwise, you're just struggling and trying to control what's unfolding, right? You get pissed off when things unfold in a way that you don't want. Then you struggle, and then you fight with this, and you struggle with that. So from the point of acceptance, the unlimited potentiality opens. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is your power, and that's really your freedom as well. Viktor Frankl, it's a riff on a Viktor Frankl quote.
I think it's it's impossible for the dualistic mind to think like we can control things and we can't control it at the same time. That's, if you say that to someone that's, not in some of these circles, like the spiritual circles, they're going to be like, that guy's crazy. But I feel like it's more of like a felt sense of thing. You're like, yeah, that's the way it is. We don't ultimately we don't understand how those two things can coexist, what they do. And I feel like that's very liberating, even though my dualistic mind can't try to make sense of it. It's the fact that our brains are, the left side of our brains is able to make all these dualistic concepts, because that's the part of our brain that likes to make lists and have definitions. It's picking up on that from somewhere. It's picking up on that from somewhere, and somehow it's translating that direct experience, that whatever the mind is, puts it into our neurons. And it's just doing it in the best way in the only way that it knows how to. It's interesting.
I have a question. I guess I'm struggling with the bridging between individual freedom, and because of the reality over the last couple of weeks, bridging it to collective freedom. So, well, I'm looking at Manuel. He has the Ukrainian flag on the background, but how do we work out, and I'm not sure how to say this, but how do we go from understanding the duality, which I'm not totally understanding right now, but it'll come, with our feeling free as me, and at the same time, the concept of feeling free, working towards freedom in the collective. I don't know if that makes sense or whatever. It's really going from the freedom on a individual, I guess, existential level, to freedom around contributing to social change or whatever.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, they're so connected, right? Our individual unconsciousness is also a collective unconsciousness, right? We individuals, society are largely unconscious. We go through the day unconscious of what's moving us, and we don't realize that innocent misunderstanding of the true nature of reality, right? So that's why we struggle and fight and so on. That's why we have wars as we have right now, and we've had for so many hundreds of years. They've never really stopped. Well, my camera just died. Can you guys still hear me? Yeah, okay. I just got it says change battery, but it gave me like a 2-second warning. Yeah, so I mean that's a topic that we could explore in a future session. I've been thinking about I was thinking about the war in Ukraine and how that could be a teaching, and then it's a war in Ukraine, but there's so many wars in the world. I mean, the war in Ukraine has captured us in a way. I think we could ask, why has the war in Ukraine captured us in a way that so many of the other wars that have gone on? There's probably wars that have gone on where many more people have died, and you might not even have realized that there was this war going on. That's a deep question to ask right there, and that's a societal question to ask. But then you can get into spiritual discussions around war as well. Like, why are we addicted to war? What is it about war that we just seem in our entertainment? You go on any streaming service right now and look at the offerings, a lot of it has to do with war, fighting, killing, some kind of death and destruction of some kind. What's with the fascination? This is a deep question. This is more of the deeper spiritual question that I was thinking of exploring with you at some point. Rather than is there such a thing as a just war? And Bhikkhu Bodhi is him and another monk have an online debate going on whether there's the Buddha justified war in any way, and if it's just to reduce harming, and they've been going back and forth. And what, for me, whether the Pali Canon has any instances where war is justified or not is not really of that much interest to debate. But this whole notion of why are we so addicted to war? Like what is this? Is it covering over the sense of insufficiency? Is it a way that we deal with insufficiency? That's something that I've been thinking. Because that ultimately fear of death and our sense of insufficiency seem to motivate most of what we do as human beings. So is it somehow related at that level? Yeah, so there's just some random, we're over time, so I don't want to go too far along on this dialogue, but it is an important topic for us to explore. And we can bring it up. I guess the war in Ukraine has elicited this in people in society. I am away next week, just to give you a heads up. But Joanna will be facilitating something. I haven't figured out what yet. If you have suggestions on talks, by all means, send them my way. That helps a lot. It gives me an idea of sort of what you're thinking. And I may record a talk or find a talk out there. I'll see how my day goes. I'm leaving this weekend to see my sister, so I don't have a lot of time, so I'll see if I get to it tomorrow. If not, then I'll pick a talk. But yeah, definitely send me your suggestions and a link to, a good 30-minute talk. And yeah, that'd be helpful. Yeah, Carl?
I was just going to say, maybe instead of looking at war, you might want to look at conflict. We've talked about anxiety, and conflict is something that could, exist like, interpersonally, between groups, between societies. So I think that might be an interesting kind of focus.
Yeah.
Just, conflict within oneself, those are all, it can go right from the macro right up to the micro down to the micro. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, another way to come at it. Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of war, where we create this us and them.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a them and an us. Yeah, good and an evil.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be a good and an evil. There has to be a good and an evil, and then there has to be an us and a them. And the sense of insufficiency gets covered over when we can be an us. This is starting to come together in my head real time. I'm starting to get a sense of how it might unfold. But that'd be when I get back, if that's that could be an interesting exploration, because that directly impacts how we live the truth. Right.
Yeah,
and then the other way that Carl suggested in terms of looking at it, in terms of conflict.
Yeah, and why is it that in a war we are always on the side of the good ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Always. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. But hope that you all see each other next Thursday.
Safe trip.
Again.
Everybody.
Smiling away.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye, everybody.
If you can picture my little black box there bowing.
We believe you.
This is what bowing actually really looks like. Right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.